It only makes sense that as a narrative driven show that has been back for a while, I don't know when's the last time I recorded something. It only makes sense that a gigantic narrative shift brings me back because I was scrolling through Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it today. And first off, I see Paul Feinbaum, SEC Warrior, always capes for the SEC, is really angry. And I, know that there's like an SEC bias no matter what amongst the media, amongst all college football fans. And truth be told, it's been the best conference this year. It's the best conference in college football a lot of years. So I can't necessarily say that it's wrong to cape for the SEC. But this year especially, I feel like we're at a state where you're either in or you're out, you're either good or you're bad. And with the last college football playoff rankings coming out this past Tuesday, SEC fans had a lot to say about a bunch of different things. And a certain Big Ten team is getting picked on. No, not Penn State, even though whatever. There's already some sort of controversy around their ranking and their standing all year, but it's Indiana going into their gigantic game this Saturday against Ohio State, number 5, going on the road to the shoe to play number 2 Ohio State. I don't know what to think or what to say about this new expanded format, but thank God it's expanded now because can you imagine? We already saw last year there was a lot of controversy over the last couple of years actually. Just before realignment really took over, we saw TCU get blown out in a national championship game that people felt they didn't deserve to be in. That year, Alabama, you had Nick Saban going on various media outlets saying that they deserved to be in, and that was when it was 4 teams. You saw teams like Ohio State, who hadn't won a conference championship, somehow luck in because USC decided to choke in the Pac-12 championship. And now, before we even get to what are we in? We're in week 13. We're really getting towards the end of the season, and we're seeing a lot of teams just either be on the outside looking in, where they've played a great season, they have a couple games that they dropped, and then you have on the flip side teams that have 1, 2, or 3 losses having a chance to go in, or like they say with Indiana, 1 loss and they might be cooked. So let's first talk about the SEC. The SEC is far and away the best conference this year in college football, but not every team is alike. I think there's multiple 2-loss teams. I think almost all the top teams have 2 losses except for Texas. So Texas is 5-1 in the conference, 9-1 overall. Their only loss being to Georgia. Texas A&M 8-2 in the conference, 5-1, 8-2 overall, 5-1 in the conference. My apologies. With I believe they lost recently, with their losses being to South Carolina and Notre Dame at the beginning of the season. Notre Dame, that was a huge win for them. That was on the road in Kyle Field at the beginning of the season, the 23-13 win for them. And then you have a team like, Georgia, who's played by far the hardest schedule in the entire country. And we're talking about a Georgia team that has the back-to-back championships. And, a lot of the things we said about their schedule is like they don't really play anybody until the conference championship game, which was true when there was divisions. But now they are playing hard schedules. They're 8-2 overall, 6-2 in the conference, with their losses being to Bama on the road in a fantastic game in September and Ole Miss on the road recently. They have a gigantic win over Clemson, killed Clemson, even though I really don't know how to quantify Clemson right now, but they almost lost to Pitt. I forget who else they lost to already. And then Georgia also had a gigantic win last week against Tennessee. I have my thoughts about Tennessee. I don't really think they're that good of a team. But then also Georgia's biggest win of the year was on the road against the number 1 team at the time, Texas, 30-15. So Georgia, in my opinion, if you would ask me who's the best team in the SEC, I would say easily Georgia, because not only do they have that, I'm giving them benefit of the doubt because they have, the acumen and just a reputation of being the best team, but also they've been battle tested. When you look at a team, if you're talking about March Madness, because the March Madness comparisons are coming, you want a team that has been battle tested. You want a team that has had the bad against good teams, but also the close wins against good teams. You don't want a team that is going out shaky where, you don't know whether they're going to win or not. And that takes us to our next team, Ole Miss. 4-2 in the conference, 8-2 overall. They started the season hot, and then they lost at home to Kentucky. By far one of the worst losses in the SEC. And then 2 weeks later, they lost on the road against LSU, something that props up LSU's resume. But for Ole Miss, it's like, okay, you lose to LSU, what are you going to do for the rest of the season? And then they beat number 3 Georgia at home. So they have a fantastic win. That might be the best win in the SEC outside of Georgia's against Texas. They play Florida and Mississippi State. They're probably on the outside looking in. They definitely want more things to go down and go in their favor in other games before I could say, yeah, they're comfortable. They're going to make the college football playoff. Then you have Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, and Missouri, which are the other teams that are ranked right now in the college football playoff rankings. Let's get the two out the way that are not making the college football playoff. Missouri's not getting anywhere near the college football playoff. They were overrated to start. They're 3-3 in the conference, 73 overall. They're not that good of a team. I'm so sorry. I can't say anything about Missouri because even though I loved watching them, they started the season ranked in the top 10, which they had no business being in. And now they proved against good teams. They suck. And then you have South Carolina, a team 7-3 right now, 5-3 in the conference. They lost against Ole Miss. They lost against Alabama. They beat Kentucky, but they lost against LSU. So with their only good wins being a close win against Missouri, and I guess if you want to call their Kentucky win a good win, and Texas A&M obviously, but we'll get to them. I don't know if the path is there for them to make the playoff. They have a game against Clemson coming up at the end of the year. That's going to be huge for them, specifically for their resume. And if a lot of things, a chaos scenario happens, and they beat Clemson, which I think they will do, South Carolina could be in a very good spot to make the playoff, but truth be told, I don't think they will. And then let's talk about A&M. A&M, in my opinion, has to do things. They need to, first off, they need to beat Texas at the end of the year. They already lost to South Carolina and they lost to Notre Dame. But you look at their schedule, we already said that Missouri isn't that good of a team. LSU is on the decline. Those 2 wins don't look as good for them anymore. So I really think A&M needs to beat. Not sure what the SEC championship game tiebreakers are, because right now Texas A&M, if we ended the season right now, would be in the championship game, but that's not going to happen because Texas and Texas A&M play at the end of the year. So Georgia, Tennessee, Bama, they're waiting for that game to happen. One of those teams is going to end up with 2 losses, and there's a lot of tiebreaker scenarios that can happen. And I guess I'm not really worried about the SEC championship game because we know 2 things are true. Both teams that make the SEC championship game are going to be in the playoff. How many bids does the SEC get? From what it seems like, the SEC wants every other auto bid or at-large bid. In my opinion, I think maybe 4 teams. 4 teams should comfortably, from the SEC, should be in the college football playoff. Tennessee, I don't think Tennessee is a good team. I do not think Tennessee is a good team. Their biggest win this year was against Alabama at home, 24-17. Bama, whatever this year. I think they'll make the playoff. I think they're a good team. But Bama, for me, is they're not the Bama of old. Georgia, they're definitely not Texas. So I'll put them in the second tier of the SEC in terms of good teams. But right now, Tennessee's best win is that Bama win a couple weeks ago. They lost to Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a trash team. So they finished the year with UTEP and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt at home for them. It's a road game for Tennessee at home for Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a shaky team. Vanderbilt has beaten a couple good teams this season, including Alabama. Alabama, 8-2, 4-2 in the conference, have a shaky resume as well. They went to Wisconsin, killed Wisconsin. They beat Georgia all in the first 4 weeks. But then right after beating Georgia, they lost to Vanderbilt on the road, 40-35. Then they beat South Carolina, a close win against South Carolina, and they lost to Tennessee. They had a stretch there where they legitimately could have lost 3 games in a row. But then they go beat Missouri, kill Missouri. Missouri is not a good team, still ranked somehow, whatever. And then they beat LSU. LSU just lost to Florida. So I think LSU's playoff chances are done. Bama still needs to go on the road to play Oklahoma, and they need to go play Auburn, and Auburn always plays them hard. So Auburn also has to play Texas A&M this week, so I don't know how that's going to go. So SEC is going to cannibalize itself, especially now because of how crazy everything is, because there's no more divisions. And the SEC this year is reminding me of the Pac-12 of the last few years, where teams would just cannibalize each other. Oregon State was good. Utah was good. Oregon was good. USC had their moments. They were good that first Lincoln Riley year. And UCLA, that Dorian Thompson-Robinson year, where he was going off. They had the moments where they were cannibalizing each other. When it looked to be a 14 playoff, that meant nothing because the Pac-12 would just eat each other up and nobody would make the playoff. Washington ended that streak last year. I don't understand why the fans are in an uproar when you're putting them against other conferences. Has SEC been the best conference this year? Yes, 100%. But you play the games on your schedule, you lose some, you win some, whatever. There's a couple bad losses for each team, and there's a couple good wins for each team. Right now, Georgia has the best resume, in my opinion, and because they've just played the better collection of games. Whether or not they won or lost, they've played the better collection of games, and I think they're the best team in the SEC. Texas, we need to have a conversation about Texas because they don't have a signature win. Like, they beat Michigan on the road at the beginning of the season. Michigan is a trash team. All right, whatever. They were ranked 10 at the time. Okay, you can keep it moving. Oklahoma, they killed Oklahoma. Oklahoma's not a good team. Keep it moving. They lost to Georgia at home. Then they barely beat Vanderbilt on the road, which shows you Vanderbilt is a sneaky team there. Vanderbilt, to me, is in the same tier as South Carolina. Not as good as South Carolina, but in the last couple of years, South Carolina was always a team that you had to play hard because they could knock you off. Other than that, what other win does Texas have? Even if you include that, of all the teams in the SEC, they're ranked number one now. Of all the teams in the SEC, they probably have the worst collection of wins. They're 9-1, and their one loss is a really, really bad loss at home against Georgia, which props Georgia up, obviously, but they don't have another win on their resume where you can say, okay, yeah, but so this Texas team deserves to be in that number one spot. They're going to win the SEC championship game, whatever. Me personally, I don't think Texas is going to win the SEC. They might be Texas A&M. I'm picking Georgia to SEC right now, even though they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the conference championship game, because truth be told, if it loses, I'm pretty sure Georgia gets the tiebreaker there, and if A&M loses, Georgia just, I think, shoots over them anyway, because I think it's a collection of other wins and whatnot, and honestly, Texas A&M has a shaky record anyway. We're not even counting LSU in everything, but at the end of the day, SEC is a great conference, I understand, but now if we're looking at this conference and putting it on par with other conferences like the Big Ten, let's transition to the Big Ten. Indiana right now is ranked 5th. They're 10-0, one of the only undefeateds left. I think the only other undefeated team ranked in the top 10, ranked in the top 25 at all, is Oregon at number 1, deservedly so, and Army 19, and they have a huge game against Notre Dame this week, so we'll see how that goes. Either way, Indiana played, I don't know how to, I need to put this delicately. All right. Indiana is in charge of their own schedule. They can only play the games that are in front of them. They played FIU, Western Illinois, on the road against UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, on the road against Northwestern. Just that first collection of 6 games is a cupcake schedule. You could it's a cupcake schedule. UCLA is a lot worse than people thought they were, but whatever. They killed all the games. It wasn't even close to any of the games. Then they played Nebraska, Nebraska looks like they had some life. They took Ohio State to the wire. They beat Colorado this year, and Colorado looks fantastic. And with Dylan Raiola, Matt Rule, they've just like they're on the come up. Indiana killed them. Like 56-7, massacred them. And then they followed that up with great wins against Washington, on the road against Michigan State, and then a close win against Michigan, where they just sleepwalked through the game, but that's neither here nor there. So now they go into the shoe to play Ohio State. And from what I'm hearing from a lot of different pundits and a lot of different fans on social media and whatnot, the running idea is if Indiana loses to Ohio State, they shouldn't be in the playoff. that people would rather take a 2 or 3 loss SEC team, a 5th SEC team probably, over a 1-loss Indiana. The Big Ten is going to send maybe, if things hold up now, the Big Ten would send probably 4 teams to the playoff, being Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State. If Indiana loses to Ohio State, Indiana will not have a ranked win. But that loss is really good. That loss is fantastic. If you compare that to every other team in the Big Ten, no matter what, I think Oregon has basically solidified their place. They could coast to the rest of the season, beat or lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, and they're in. Ohio State has the resume this year. They had a good loss. I think there's a bad loss and a good loss. Oregon by 1 score, 1 point actually, is a very good loss on the road. They went to Penn State, beat them by a score. They play hardest schedule because they play Indiana and then they play Michigan. Not saying Michigan's going to beat them, but it's a rivalry game. You know what's going to happen. Ohio State, no matter what happens against Indiana, that's actually, I don't even know. Because if they lose to Indiana, they forfeit their right to a Big Ten championship game. And I'm not saying Ohio State will lose to Indiana. In fact, I think Ohio State's going to beat Indiana. Is Ohio State comfortable? Yes. I don't think they should be worried, but there is a scenario, a nightmare chaos scenario for them where they could be on the outside looking in. Penn State doesn't have that good of a resume either. Obviously, they started the season really, really, really high preseason ranking. I think they started 8 or whatnot. The loss to Ohio State, that's a very good loss. 1 score, they didn't get embarrassed. Illinois is currently ranked. I don't know if you put that as a ranked win because a lot of people think Illinois is overrated. I don't understand what the idea behind that. Illinois is 7-3 with some pretty good wins this year. So that's neither here nor there. Penn State's probably chilling for the rest of the season. They have Minnesota on the road this week. Trap game for them probably, but they had a bunch of trap games where they had USC and Wisconsin in back-to-back weeks on the road and pulled through. So I think they're good in the trap status, and they finish off with Maryland. I think Penn State is comfortable. They're going to be an at-large bid. I don't think they have to worry, especially right now. They're ranked. They're number 4 nation. They're fine. The big controversy right now is if Indiana loses to Ohio State, can you put them in the playoff over another SEC team that may have 2 or 3 losses? And my answer to that is unless Indiana gets absolutely bludgeoned by Ohio State, like I'm talking 2 or more scores, yes, the answer is yes. You can easily put Indiana in the playoff. I think they should be fine. It feels as if like fans love to watch, especially fans in certain like power conferences, love to see small teams win. Because Indiana, I'm not calling them a small team. They obviously play in the Big Ten, but they're not a football school. This is not a school that you expect it to be 10-0 at this point in the season, schedule or not. I legitimately think that fans love to see a team play really well, especially if it's a team that, is not a Cinderella necessarily, but a team that doesn't really, win a lot. We saw the same with Kansas when they were just going through the Big 12 a couple years ago. We're seeing now with Colorado. I'm not going to say people are loving it because obviously Deion Sanders and whatnot. Colorado has a really good chance to win the Big 12 and make the playoff this year, but that's neither here nor there. People love to see a Cinderella story until that Cinderella story gets a little more real. Ari Wasserman wrote a fantastic article for On3 today about these woes, where he said, it reminds me of the NCAA tournament. Everyone loves the Cinderella, but most people still want to see North Carolina and Duke in the Final Four. We saw this when TCU made the national championship game. Even though they beat Michigan, they lost to Georgia, but really bad. But nobody could tell me that TCU didn't deserve to be there because they just played what's in front of them. They played their schedule. They didn't lose. The same SEC fans that are saying, oh, we should have a team in, there's pretty bad losses. I think Ohio State is a very good loss. Ohio State on the road is a fantastic loss. And especially if they keep it close, it's a way better loss than a lot of these teams that are playing the SEC, have. And a lot better than some of the teams that want to be in the conversation. Let's just look through, right? So let's say in a scenario, we're picking Texas, Georgia, Alabama. Let's just do the highest ranked teams right now. We'll do Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia to make the playoff. Those four are currently ranked inside the top 10. Let's say Texas A&M doesn't make it. If Texas A&M, they lose to Texas, they don't make the SEC championship game, what could they say against a number, whatever, Indiana that would be there? Oh, we should be in this position other than them. Okay, yeah, but you lost to Notre Dame at the beginning of the season at home, and you also lost on the road very convincingly against a South Carolina team that's not in the playoff. Bang. You lost to a non-playoff team, you're done. I think that's as simple as that, right? Let's talk about Tennessee. Tennessee, yes, you have a really good win. Tennessee might have, which is crazy because I said they weren't that good. Tennessee might have the biggest qualm if Indiana is in the playoff and they're not. But Tennessee, you have a bad loss against Arkansas. Like, that's a terrible loss. And you also lost to Georgia as well. Who knows what's going to happen when they go to Vandy, but that's another bad loss. So yes, you have a really good Bama win at home by one score, but you have that terrible, terrible loss. Okay, so that's a really bad loss. I'm comparing the losses for these SEC teams in comparison to what an Ohio State loss would be. An Ohio State that's probably going to win the Big Ten championship. An Ohio State that their only loss up to this point was a 1-point loss against Oregon, who's the number one team in the country, and they have a gigantic win against, at the time, or even right now, a top 4 team in a really tough environment against Penn State. Okay, Ole Miss. I know we put Ole Miss in this current scenario, but I did touch on Ole Miss. They lost to Kentucky at home. That is a disgusting loss. That is a atrocious loss. That might be the worst loss of all the teams I'm about to speak on. I mean, hell, truth be told, an Arkansas loss is pretty bad, but the Kentucky loss is disgusting. Right now, Kentucky has only one loss one win in conference, and that's against Ole Miss. So that's a loss for Ole Miss. All right, let's continue. Missouri, we're not even thinking about. South Carolina, we're not even thinking about. Any team that beat LSU, the way LSU looks, LSU just lost to Florida. I'm not that and saying, oh yeah, this is a team that deserves to be in the playoff. Yeah, no, sorry. So LSU against LSU does not go on your resume at this point. So yes, I'm putting a 1-loss Indiana unless they get bludgeoned. That's the only saying. Yeah, we should probably say, yeah, you didn't play good against a quality opponent. So why should you make it to the playoff? Let's talk about another team. Notre Dame. We talked good wins versus bad losses. What teams are really in danger? I think because Notre Dame has just been, coasting. They've been playing really, really well. Right now, this is their ranked matchup in a while. Actually, since Texas A&M, I want to say. We forget that Notre Dame, of all the teams that are in the playoff right now, or projected to be in the playoff, of all the teams that are ranked right now, they have the worst loss out of all of them. Notre Dame has a win against Texas A&M at Coppell. That's a fantastic win, okay? They have a win against Louisville. Louisville is okay. They're okay. I can't really say, I don't know how good Louisville is now, especially considering Louisville beat Clemson. But again, we're saying Clemson is weird. But they just lost to Stanford. So, okay. They have Army this week. And this is their last chance. They need to they are, if they beat Army, I fully think that they're going to beat USC because USC just right now is in shambles. What has Notre Dame done outside of the win to start at Texas A&M? If we're looking at resumes, Notre Dame has the worst loss out of everybody, and I'm seeing people project them to have I think right now they're projected to have a home playoff game in the college football playoff. They don't play in a conference, so they don't get a conference championship. So they're an at-large bid. They're an at-large favorite. 5 is also really, really weird because, look, not going to lie, right now, thank goodness BYU's in a conference because I would be really upset if they weren't getting any love because they wouldn't have gotten any love if they were still Group of 5. Right now, Boise State is the highest rated Group of 5 team, and they played great. They have a Heisman. Probably going to be a Heisman finalist. I don't know about winner. And Ashton Genty on their team. They're at 12. Then you have Army, who needs to be Notre Dame or else they're done. And then you have Tulane, who is 9-2 in the American, and then UNLV. So why are we treating Notre Dame different than the other group of fives is my question. Because I think the auto bids are all the highest ranked conference champions. There's 6 right now. They're going to get a bid, Notre Dame, right? I need to pull up the current CFP bracket, and let's really look at what the committee is saying. Right now, Oregon has Texas. So does Miami because right now they're the highest ranked ACC team and they're projected to be the champion. We're going to talk about Miami. And then Boise State, okay, whatever. And then first round, you have Indiana, Ole Miss, Penn State against Georgia, Notre Dame, Bama, Ohio State, BYU. The group of 5 is on the outside looking in, and it would be, I don't think Boise State should get an auto bid. Whatever. Last 2 out are Georgia. Last two in are Georgia and BYU. The first 4 out are Tennessee, SMU, Colorado, and Clemson. Clemson should not be there. Their best win is against Pitt, and they have South Carolina coming up. I don't think they win against South Carolina. I think they're done. Colorado, slowly making a climb up. They are in the driver's seat to win the Big 12. SMU might be the ACC champion. They might be the ACC champion. They've played fantastic this year, and I would pick them to be my not my ACC champion because Miami. No, I'm picking SMU over Miami. I'm picking SMU over Miami. They look fantastic. Their only loss is against BYU, who we've already said is probably going to be one of the Big 12 candidates to make the championship game or win it. Arizona State is also on the outside looking in. They play BYU this week. I think Arizona State beats them. Arizona State also not in the driver's seat necessarily, but they're on the outside looking in. A&M, they beat Texas, they're in. They lose Texas, they're out. That's it. Iowa State and they play Kansas State next week, and I don't know. The Big 12, people are saying the Big 12 is a bad conference, but I really don't see a difference between the Big 12 and the SEC at this stage, at this point in the season. South Carolina, they beat other things fall in their favor. They could be someone looking in. But then you have the group of 5 where you have Boise State, Tulane, Army, UNLV, and Louisiana. Get Louisiana out of here. UNLV, whatever. Army and Tulane. Army is probably going to lose to Notre Dame, and I think they'd be done. Tulane are the only group of 5 team outside of Boise State where I think, okay, if they lose, everybody else loses. Like if Boise State loses to UNLV, and Army loses, and Louisiana again, they're not whatever. I think Tulane is the other group of 5 team that I think has a chance to make the playoff because I don't know, Boise State. I don't know. They get a lot of attention because they have a Heisman but a Heisman contender on their team. I don't know how good they are, honestly. So if you look at guarantees right now, the current bracket, I think Oregon stays. Texas, if they lose to Texas A&M, it would be a gigantic fall. But if they lose to other teams, if they lose to Texas A&M, how about this? If they lose to Texas A&M and Georgia beats A&M in a potential SEC championship game, I think Texas is done. Indiana, just don't get bludgeoned by Ohio State, and I think you're comfortable. Ole Miss, I don't know. Ole Miss is probably, they're not comfortable. I was sweating if I was Ole Miss because you don't really have any more opportunities to prove that you're the best team. Georgia, obviously, you beat. But Georgia right now is ranked below Ole Miss, and I don't think I think Georgia's the best SEC team. They should be ranked above Ole Miss easily. Penn State is comfortable. I think Penn State's probably, of all the teams we've just listed, again, outside of Oregon and Ohio State, the Big Ten teams are fine because unless they would have to chaotically slip up. If Oregon loses the Big Ten championship, they're fine. If Ohio State loses the Big Ten championship, they're fine. There'd be a 2-loss Big Ten team, but I don't see how you could say, oh yeah, they don't deserve to be in there. That's another situation. If Ohio State loses in the Big Ten championship game, they would be a 2-loss non-champion, and put that against other 2-loss non-champions from the SEC that didn't make the championship game, what are you going to say? Like that, if we're going to talk about Indiana with 1 loss against those 2-loss non-championship teams from the SEC. Let's look, if Ohio State doesn't make the SEC championship game, are you going to say, oh, they don't deserve to be in it? Because they do, no matter what. I think Oregon and Ohio State are comfortable as hell. Unless, of course, Ohio State loses to Indiana and subsequently doesn't make the championship game. That's another situation. But Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, all comfortable. Georgia, they're hating on Georgia, and I don't understand why. I think Georgia should be comfortably in. I think Georgia's going to make the SEC championship game no matter what. And if that happens, then they will be. Georgia Tech is kind of a scary game, but whatever. If that happens, they will be my team to win the SEC championship game, and I think they will be comfortably in the playoff. Notre Dame, Baby Army, they're fine, whatever. They have the worst loss because Northern Illinois is not even a good MAC team. So Bama is just sitting there. I don't think they sweating, but at the same time, if other things in the SEC don't happen the way they'd like, yeah, Bama's not making it. And then and BYU is also sweating because I can't tell what BYU really is because they've been trying to lose every single game that they've played, and I think they actually did just lose to Kansas. So they play Arizona State on the road this week. I think they lose to Arizona State. I think BYU is probably the most uncomfortable team right now because if they lose to Arizona State, they automatically drop third, I think, in the Big 12 because then Colorado and Arizona State will be playing for a Big 12 championship in a couple weeks, and BYU will have nothing to do with it. And that's probably what's going to end up happening. So, oh well. But I think the narrative of the SEC deserves more teams, whether or not they have they have a couple teams ranked right now, but there are a lot of teams that don't deserve to be there. If 11-1 Indiana is put up against 2 losses or 3-loss SEC teams that don't make their championship games, as long as Indiana doesn't lose terribly, I think I'd pick an Indiana college football playoff. I'm going to make it. So that's pretty much it. Stick to Sports Podcast and on YouTube. Follow us on all the DSPs. Follow me on X at Noah_Deej, at Noah_Deej on Blue Sky too as well. That's something new. Stick to Sports on TikTok. Let's have a conversation. Let's keep talking. How's this weekend going to go? This is going to be a fantastic weekend in college football. I'm very excited. I hope you guys are excited. Thank you for listening, watching, wherever you're getting this. Thank you. Oh, gosh.